So as for the last one, this webinar is being recorded and will be published on our YouTube channel of the foundation, the ICL Foundation. This is also going to be publicized in our on our website and our social media channels. So if you want more information, you can look at our project website. And we'll give you the link later on. That being said, we'll take some questions at the end of the webinar. You can either turn on your microphone and ask them, or you can also write them in the chat box right on your left. At least that's where I see it. So yeah, I'll leave the floor to Gabriele, that being said, and thank you for joining us.
Okay. Thank you very much, Eleonora. Hope you can see my screen. And well, welcome also from my side to the second episode of the MaaS Talks. As Eleonora introduced, today we will be talking about the MaaS ecosystem and the business models which animate it and make it work. How is the webinar going to proceed? The first step is your view on the mobility market of the future. Then we will give you a short presentation, but quite dense, about the business models and the main features, what we call our business models cookbook. And then we will have our guest, Matteo Antoniola from Cinquetti, which will tell us about his approach to MaaS, his preferences, and the work done so far in order to implement it in the Piemonte region. And we will leave indeed, as Eleonora said, little time also for the question and answers and a bit of discussion of the topics that are being presented. So now I invite you immediately to answer our introductory question: who will be the main actors in the mobility ecosystems of the future? If you kindly go to menti.com and insert the code 4543-2021, you can answer the question. Waiting for your inputs. Okay. Okay, so it seems main answers are focusing so far on the, let's say, the real world versus the virtual world or the digital world, since among the main actors you are mainly identifying the service providers, the local authorities, and in some case, but significant case, also companies coming from different, let's say, originally different industries, but well known as being capable to have a strong influence in the markets they decide to address, such as big data companies and also some, to a certain extent, automotive. So the key, Our giveaway from this first introductory question is that basically the key actor in the future might not be the ones we are used to, or only partially. And this is also up to us, up to the structure we decide to give to the mobility as a service initiative and ecosystem in the territories where we want to plan this innovation. Better, this is up not to us, but to the policymakers and to the way they design and manage the future ecosystems. So let's have a look of how, in general, the MaaS business ecosystem looks. As you can see, a wide range of actors are mentioned in this diagram I am showing you. Maybe the automotive sector, which was mentioned before, is missing, but we could interpret this category transport operators as representing both the traditional operators, the shared and flexible mobility providers, and including those services which are more automotive oriented, such as, for example, the mainstream free-floating car sharing and others. The actors are grouped in different tiers, as you can see, around the MaaS operator. And the core business, where customers, users might include also local authorities and companies in a B2B perspective. The extended enterprise, the third circle actually, where technology and mobility dedicated services providers, including insurance companies, are identified, and then the broader circle, which includes a wide range of stakeholders interested in the development of the ecosystem. So how does it work shaping the MaaS services from the operator point of view? It's basically, you can imagine it as a linear correlation starting from the MaaS operator circle, deciding to involve and engage, especially in the broader circles, different providers, different partners, different key actors. And this gives an idea of the multiple possible combinations which compose not only the ecosystem as such, but the different MaaS initiatives and the different MaaS platforms that are being and might be developed on one territory, on one functional urban area. So the growth of the different business models within the MaaS business ecosystems is clearly linked to the characteristics of the operational and governance model, which is being designed and implemented by planners and policymakers. Here's an example of the first codified governance model. It's the so-called private integrator, where MaaS players aggregate services from the supply side and provide them under a seamless and integrated shape to the final users. Platforms aren't necessarily pure resellers of services, but can act in some cases just as intermediaries or, let's say, matching facilitators. The model requires a strong negotiation capabilities by the MaaS players on a commercial basis concerning the procurement of services with the supply side. A policy for data is required in order to enable the sharing and the exchange. The main risks of this approach concern the possibility of monopolistic or oligopolistic behaviors by the main actors, by the main MaaS players, and at the same time, the possibility, the risk of a disalignment between MaaS objective and societal challenges. And this has to be taken into account by the plan. On the advantages side, also it has to be taken into account that this model is highly scalable, is for sure customer-oriented, and if it offers a plurality of choices to the final user. Another model, governance and organization model, is represented by the so-called open backend platform, an evolution of the previous one. In this case, we have a public entity which sets up a platform for data sharing with rules which are determined by the public authority or by other neutral parties. And this system is built as and provided as an open infrastructure. All mobility services, according to the model, they have to open up their APIs in order to be integrated in this open platform. The model is scalable on the territory at local, interregional, and also international level by engaging and integrating operators from different transport sectors and with different nature, of course. And there are lower entry barriers compared to the previous model, since part of the, let's say, negotiation of or integration, especially concerning the integration of data, basically are enabled by the model itself and by the governance and the requirement of sharing open APIs. At the same time, the infrastructure is open and managed independently, and at the same time, the control power by the local authorities results higher if compared to the previous model. On the minus side, we have to note that this model may have an implementation process a bit more complex and slower, and at the same time is up to the public authorities to maintain and update part of the infrastructure. So there is indeed a burden and a commitment needed also under the financial point of view. The third model, which codifies the possible governance models so far observed concerning mobility as a service, sees the central role of the public transport provider and is integrating a range of mobility services to its core business, to the core businesses of public transport. The MaaS service itself can either be developed and operated entirely by the public domain, or can be also awarded or licensed to some private organization. But public transport leads the process in order to remain strategic and attractive to its customers and citizens. Moreover, it should be able to guarantee a certain alignment with the societal goals. But on the other side, it might be perceived as less innovative and attractive for certain target groups, since the level of integration of new mobility services and market-oriented mobility services still has to be verified. On the plus side, thanks to this model, there will be a stronger relationship of the MaaS provider with the local authorities, and this, as we said, is also a guarantee of the public value of the initiative. Among the risks, the possible lack of integration of innovative mobility, as we said, might limit the user choices and might foster even to the rise of private alternative to MaaS, to this kind of MaaS, more focused, for example, on car-based services. So real competitors on a MaaS field, but under different governance approaches. Moreover, we have to note that in this case, the scalability of the model, which is designed on the territory, is definitely limited. As we have seen, the governance choices strongly affect the options in the setup of a MaaS ecosystem. But what are the main ingredients we need for a MaaS ecosystem? We have here briefly listed public transport, new mobility services, the platform, or better to say the platforms, data and data sharing and the sharing framework, regulatory and technologically enabling, the role, of course, of societal goals, and the actions needed for the uptake. As we can say, we are now concerning, we are now in a market which is at a, let's call it, pre-competitive phase, where these models and the business models must be shaped according to the common needs and goals set up as priorities by the planning level. But let's continue our journey and now walk across some examples of business models in order to see how these are evolving in this phase, in this pre-market phase. So what we can observe so far about business models. The first case is the typical business model of an independent MaaS platform, which is basically matching supply and demand. This approach would work under the first and the second governance models described before. We have a business which generally as a target group, the final user, and especially usually is starting from a limited, a specific group of early adopters which test and use the services, is based on a personalized and customized subscription model. Can be represented by the customization of mobility packages, for example, has basically vertically all the main functionalities, including the very important and crucial ticketing and electronic payment. And from the revenue point of view, have three main streams, which are the subscription, the pay-as-you-go approach, or provide fees for additional services when the packages are very customized and usually for premium users. The main cost category in this case, in case the platform is really a reseller, a dealer of mobility options, is related to the payments to mobility providers. There is also the case, indeed, but we will see it later, that the MaaS platform acts as a basically matching system and is not reselling the services, but basically organizing the matching between demand and supply. But this is indeed not the only model we can observe so far, even if we have to say we are in a pre-competitive stage, in a setup stage for the governance level, so very little we can say about the effectiveness of these business models and also about their possibility to develop further and build further on their experience and so change over time. A second approach is the case of a public transport-led business model. We took the Transdev, so multinational company of public transport with interests in many countries around the world, as an example of a public transport-led business model, which indeed has a certain level of scalability because it can be, if well designed, applied to different contexts by the same, by the traction of the same content. So this approach indeed matches the third governance model we described. This, as we said before, it does not exclude the possible competition by private-led alternative platforms, especially when they're based, for example, only on market services for example, car sharing integrating personal mobility services. So we can imagine a scenario in which we still have a public transport-led main business model for the mobility as a service market, but we also have a really, let's say, a tougher and more defined competition between, let's say, public-led and collective transport modes and shared and personal modes based not only on cars, but based on integration of market-oriented services. This is a scenario that can be taken into account according to the attractiveness of certain markets, of course. So as we said, this solution is indeed scalable for different contexts. When behind the solution you have a company which is competing in several markets, is at the same time public transport based, and it's usually integrating also the long distance, for example, train and planes in the options, as well as shared modes to a certain extent, basically the bike sharing and the parking systems, and uses as payment methods, for example, this specific example uses e-beacons for transport services and QR codes for parking under the, let's say, technological point of view. The billing system is in general monthly to the customer, and the revenue streams come both from subscriptions and pay-as-you-go approaches, depending on the kind of relationship, customer relationship with the final user. So far, differently from the previous model, there are not, in this case, we have no evidence of the development or the willingness to develop mobility packages at the moment, but this cannot be excluded for the future. A third possible, let's say, business model which we have analyzed for this purpose is represented by the business model of a so-called shared mobility aggregator. So what we could imagine also in the future as possible competitor to the public oriented within the same environment. In this case, the cases of Urbi, which today is an aggregator of shared mobility services, which indeed has the aim of becoming a leading actor in the future, expanding and integrating a broader range of services, so competing also in different competitive environments and collaborative environments in the case of the model based on the open infrastructure. So Urbi offers real-time planning for its users. It is including also other private services, well, not private, but car-based, such as taxis and Uber. It is aggregating the services and the offer in mobility packages and vouchers as, let's say, on an experimental level, or providing, let's say, the services on a, or facilitating the services on a pay-as-you-go basis. It has a different revenue stream compared to the previous one. As a matching platform nowadays, it's not buying and reselling services, but is receiving commissions on the services of the third parties, which are usually aggregated. So, in this overview, I tried to give you a first glance of how the mobility as a service business models are evolving so far and what is the perspective for the future. This is because business models have a crucial role in the mass planning process indeed. We can't only imagine the governance model without having expectations or making simulation on how the market will be organized, and so how the actors will collaborate and compete at the same time into the ecosystem. Whether the MaaS planning process is public-oriented or private-oriented, this doesn't really matter. So what you need to make the ecosystem work. So how do the MaaS provider find their place along the supply chain? This is a big question. Second question is, what do you want for your citizens? So what kind of services, what kind of approach to the integrated mobility? We isolated the three components of the business models, which are particularly interesting in our opinion. So key activities, customer segments, and revenue model. To give you an idea of all the possible combinations, or let's call them flavors, that mobility as a service can have, depending on how the market develops. So among key activities, we made three examples. A key activity could be the integration, so the matching, can be the big data collection and analysis, both for commercial purposes, but also from the public point of view, for better knowledge and data-based mobility planning, which is a great opportunity for public authorities. Or, of course, we can focus basically on operating the mobility services and being more attractive by providing a certain degree of integration. What is the customer segment of mobility as a service? The answer is it depends. It depends on the orientation of the mobility provider. It depends on the institutional context, on the governance model, and also on the opportunities which the demands expresses. So the unsatisfied demand that we can find on the market. Customer segment can be, the most deployed can be mainly B2C, so directly to the citizen or the consumer, can be B2G, so as service providers or technology providers for a public mobility as a service player or initiative. It can be focusing on specific early adopters or niche or categories of users, such as, for example, commuters, no car owners, etc., in order then to expand to the mainstream demand. Can it be also B2B? Because in some cases, for example, we can imagine company mobility management strategies can become more effective and more sustainable by the commercial relationship with an integrator, which is somehow providing and brokering services and aggregating according to the needs of the company and its employees, for example. There are several options also under this point of view, and there are several options when we talk about revenue models. Some of them we already seen in our very, very short overview. We can base a revenue model, or actually MaaS players can base their revenue model mainly on commissions from users, on the bundling of mobility packages, so on the customization, on the fees from the providers that they put on the market, on public contracts, in case we have a public-oriented approach and we are basically technology providers, on subscription, again, on pay-as-you-go revenue schemes, or specific fees for or complementary specific fees from premium services, specific services, and so on. So This is basically a general overview, which I hope you found interesting on how the business models are, let's say, facing the market in this very, let's say, initial stage, and on what they can become and what are the options and what we can expect. This doesn't exclude the fact, or maybe even fosters and expects, that new players from new industries are facing this new market in the future. Because actually, when we talk about mobility as a service and integrated mobility at the moment, we are concentrated on how to design it and how to make it work. But behind the concept of mobility as a service, we have the opportunity of integrated mobility. Integrated mobility is a powerful mean in order to compete with private mobility. So you can imagine how the integration can act as multiplier when we sum up different markets, such as, for example, the market of sharing, the market of on-demand services, and the traditional market of public transport. We can, let's say, easily expect, looking at the previous experiences and the interest shown by different subjects from different industries, that this market is rather expected to expand and to multiply when integrated, because it becomes more attractive and more interesting also, with high potential for the final user. On one side, of course, we have to be able to design a mobility as a service framework which is compliant with the public objectives, with the strategies of our territory. On the other side, we have to be able to, let's say, make a good use of these opportunities. So support the growth of the market as long as it brings benefits to the different stakeholders, and especially to the final user or to the citizen, in terms of better sustainability and higher levels of satisfactions and connectivity. So now let me introduce our guest, which is Matteo Antoniola, which is a strategy manager at 5T or 5T in Italian, and let me say is also one of my personal MaaS gurus. 5T is the city of Torino, the metropolitan area, and the Piemonte region in-house company, which is specialized in intelligent transport systems, and which is developing, among others, very many and interesting projects in the field of MaaS at local, national, and international level. So, welcome, Matteo.
Thank you, Gabriele. Thank you for inviting me. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So let me ask you immediately a question connected to the last things we were talking about. Tell me, what is your favorite MaaS flavor? So which models you expect to be more successful in the future when you look at the potential market of MaaS?
Okay, thank you for this hard question. First of all, I would like to draw your attention to the idea that all the things that Gabriele told us in the previous half an hour, in my opinion, will be true. All of them, all of these tips, issues, and features of this MaaS ecosystem will be true at the same time. What do I mean? I mean that probably over the next year we will see so many different and possible mobility as a service applications, platforms, services that will follow different models. We will probably have at the same time, in the same place, in the same community, several different MaaS services, maybe one following the public transport exit-all model, another one following the marketplace model, another one following maybe in some communities the open backend platforms. So I mean, all of these models will be at the same time valid, viable, and possible, and probably we will see so many different options. Why do I say this? Because as far as I have learned until now, working about mobility service, I see that we will have to address so many different user needs, that we will have so many different MaaS services in order to match those needs of the citizens. We can just think about commuters living in urban areas that are maybe frequently user of public transport and would like to just add some shared mobility option for some journeys. We might think of commuters living in more suburban or rural areas who are likely to be more car dependent, but who might consider some other more sustainable and collective transport options, if any, for just a part of the journeys. We can think of families willing to share their mobility service among all the components of the family. We can think of tourists coming from another country and staying for maybe 3 or 4 days in one community, maybe with their group or with a family, needing something else. We can think of car owners that can receive MaaS applications directly from their car maker. We can or insurance company. So we can have so many different services, so many different target users, and so many different operators that might provide services following different business models according to different ecosystem models. So you can see how big, how hard it is to put all these things together in a common vision.
Okay, thanks. But this is also what you are doing, what you are trying to do in your territory. So how are you doing it? How are you implementing MaaS in the Piemonte region and in the city of Torino? What are the steps? What are the projects you are developing? We are very curious about that.
Okay. First of all, the first step was understanding, learning, studying, understanding, looking at who has already done something. Especially in Europe. Then we have started with 2 different projects. One is called Buoni Mobilità, that means mobility budget, and will be a pilot MaaS application for citizens of Torino willing to give up their car and receiving from the administration a monthly budget to move around the city without with their car. And this is a pilot service intended to stimulating a more sustainable and let's say informed lifestyle and mobility experience of our citizens. On the other side, we are also running a strategic project. It is called the Bip for MaaS. Bip for MaaS is a project which aims to create a common vision and define the framework of rules in order to lower the barriers and let MaaS take off in Torino and in Piemonte, not only in the urban and metropolitan area of Torino, but also in the rural areas. And is intended to be based on the open backend platform ecosystem. So if you ask me what is my favorite flavor, I would say in our community, we will look at the open backend platform ecosystem model as the preferred one, but we cannot exclude any other business model or ecosystem model that might be also viable in Torino and in Piemonte. Of course, Bit4MaaS has also a website. If anyone is curious about knowing more about our project, can visit our website, bit4maas.it.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure most of our guests are very, very curious about that. And of course, last question from my side. Building MaaS is also and mainly about, not mainly, but also about engaging stakeholders. So from your experience, which ones are the key ones in order to build an effective ecosystem, and why are they so important? And at the same time, what were the main challenges in engaging them, in gathering their participation and commitment?
Well, of course, according to the more conventional idea of, or traditional idea of MaaS, public transport is, of course, the one of the key players, because we want to have a MaaS or a plurality of MaaS services that include our public transport. Why? Because public transport is collective, is sustainable, and above all is subsidized by public resources. So we need to accompany this huge MaaS transformation on the one side, but on the other side we need to guarantee the key role of our collective transport. Of course, then we have to involve also any shared mobility provider, any mobility service providers operating in any community. But let me say, while public transport is peculiar of the local community and is already orchestrated by the local authority or administration, mobility service providers are international players, and of course their willingness to be part of MaaS ecosystems will be decided on an international and global basis. But of course, shared mobility is much more willing to be part of MaaS. Public transport, of course, is much more reluctant to be part of MaaS because sees MaaS as more as a threat than as an opportunity. And the main challenge is the key role. Who is the key role? The key actor is the public administration, the public transport authority, the public governance, which has the task to, in create a common vision, put all of them together, all the actors together, and let them cooperate, and of course trying to take the public transport, the local public transport company into this new game called MaaS.
Okay, thank you very much, Matteo, for your insights. I would now open the floor for discussion to the other participants. As it's becoming usual, I ask also Eleonora to moderate a bit if it's needed this session. And so the floor is yours.
Right, maybe I can just break the ice also, because we just have a few minutes left actually. So yeah, first of all, thank you very much, Matteo, for your thoughts and your insights on MaaS, and especially in Piemonte region. And I think actually you started some interesting consideration, especially about the geographical coverage of MaaS. And I actually wanted to start from there because, well, as you know, the Institute for Transport and Logistics is based in Bologna, and we also support the Emilia-Romagna region to offer different services, including MaaS, and I would say we have quite a privileged insight on what is happening. So yeah, first of all, I guess my question would be, so what do you see ideally as the geographical boundary of a MaaS in terms of should it be the metropolitan city of, I'm thinking of Bologna, but of course Turin is the same, or should it be even more, so perhaps the region? And in case you're looking, or even further than that, because it could be, you know, for example, different regions in the Pianura Padana. And also, yeah, I would like to ask you, in that case, what should be the role of mobility agencies? Because of course they should be involved in the MaaS service and process. But we know it's hard to integrate different services, even when MaaS is not in place. And we actually have an experience with that in Emilia-Romagna, because we have an application which is called Roger, which is supposed to be, or at least the very start of a MaaS service. However, this is in practice managed by just one of the mobility agencies of Emilia-Romagna, but Roger actually aims to serve the entire region. So I hope the question was clear. Just so geographical coverage of MaaS and the role of mobility agencies. If you can just give us some thoughts on that.
Well, well, thank you for this question. I would like to have half an hour to answer your question, but I don't. First of all, coverage, at least metropolitan area, maybe also regional one. Because why? Because in order to give quite similar mobility options to our citizens, we need to consider also rural areas, because rural MaaS will be one of the main topics about MaaS, because but it requires different perspectives and different models. Why? Because MaaS offers in the metropolitan area might probably be profitable. Of course, they won't be in the rural areas. They will need, again, public funding through maybe micro subsidies or whatever else. So it requires also change in the way public authorities manage and operate, plan and subsidize mobility. And here we come to the second part of the question. The role of the agency might vary from a minimum to a maximum. Should not be the absence of role. Of course, they need to, at least they need to define a framework of rules and regulate. The minimum role is regulate on the local basis, and it means ensure that any mobility and transport provider working and operating services in one single region community area are required to open up their APIs, service and data to third parties. Of course, according to a predefined framework of rules, according to fair and neutral technical and economical conditions. This is the minimum. The maximum might be also to put in place and operate an open backend platform owned and managed by the public sector. And this is the model that we are trying to follow here in Torino and Piemonte. The third level might be also operate the MaaS service, but this risks to be in conflict with the principle of avoiding monopolies. And this is, in my opinion, one of the most relevant risks in MaaS, if we look at the role of the public sector.
Okay, wow, thank you very much. I really love this approach of having very, very clear idea of what can be done and what are the consequences then of the public action. I don't know if there are any questions, any further questions to Matteo? If not, I would say that we are finishing in time.
Yeah, so we're finishing perfectly on time almost. And of course, if anyone has got more questions, you can either email us or you can just pop up a question in the chat or in the future. All right, so I would say again, thanks for everyone who joined today, and hopefully in the next and final episode, which Gabriele has kindly put up on the slide you can see on the screen. So please do join us in the final episode, which is going to happen on Wednesday, June 9th, from 2:30 until 3:30. And this is going to be about planning MaaS and the mobility we want. Gabriele, do you want to give any spoiler about special guests or special topics we're going to cover?
Well, sure. So the objective is, as it is basically to try to wrap up all the findings and add some hopefully useful tips on how to plan mobility as a service within the process of planning mobility and planning sustainable mobility. So within basically the SAMP framework. As guests, we will probably 99% have Julia Zintek from the municipality of Graz, which is developing in the last years basically from scratch a completely customized approach to mobility as a service built on the needs of the citizens and on the need for sustainability of the city infrastructure and mobility system. So we will hear from her really and several insights on how to do it step by step, how to build it from a public administration perspective.
All right, then we really should not miss out on that. Thank you, Gabriele, and thanks again, Matteo, for participating and being our co-host today.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure for me.
Thank you very much. Looking forward for the next time.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Bye, thank you.